The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and Nathan Cross stepped out carrying a cardboard tray with 4 coffees and a bottle of water he'd bought for himself. He was the driver. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the point. 60 seconds later, the glass doors at the end of the corridor exploded inward, and 8 men in gray suits walked through the smoke with rifles already raised. If you've ever wondered what a man looks like when he's trying very hard not to be recognized, watch Nathan's face in that moment. Watch how still he goes. Like every second, he is counting something. Wand. If this story grips you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Nathan Cross woke at 4:51 that morning, 9 minutes before his alarm. He lay flat on his back in the dark, listening to his daughter breathe through the wall. Sophie was 6. She slept with a stuffed rabbit she called Butter, and a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that turned the hallway a pale amber color he'd grown so used to he couldn't fall asleep without it anymore. He got up without noise. He was good at that. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom for Sophie, 1 for him, a kitchen where the cabinet above the stove didn't close all the way, and a living room with a couch he'd bought secondhand from a woman in the next building who was moving to Phoenix. The walls were bare except for 1 framed photograph on the shelf above the television. Sophie at 4, laughing at something outside the frame, her mother's hand visible at the edge of the shot, reaching toward her. He'd kept the picture for Sophie's sake. He looked at it less than he used to. He made coffee, drank half of it standing at the counter, then poured the rest down the drain because it had gone cold while he stood there doing nothing in particular. Thinking, or something like thinking. He did that sometimes in the mornings, just stood in one place and let the quiet press against him until it felt less heavy. By 5:40, he had Sophie's lunch packed, her backpack by the door, and her uniform laid across the foot of her bed so she wouldn't spend 12 minutes looking for her shoes the way she did every time he left it up to her. He'd learned that the hard way. He woke her at 6. She groaned and pulled Butter over her face. "Sophie? No? Your eggs are getting cold." One eye appeared above the rabbit's ear. "You made eggs?" "Scrambled, with cheese." She sat up. The negotiation was over. He dropped her at school by 7:15, walked back to his car, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment with his hands resting in his lap. The morning was gray and cool, the kind of late October day that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. He watched 2 pigeons fight over a piece of bread on the sidewalk across the street and thought about nothing in particular. Then he drove to Apex Defense Technologies and went to work. What? Nathan had been driving for the company for 14 months. He'd applied for the job through a veterans placement program, and the HR coordinator who interviewed him had been kind in the particular way people were kind to veterans. Careful, slightly guilty, as though she felt she owed him something. He told her he was looking for something stable and low pressure. She told him the position involved transporting executives, handling airport pickups, and occasionally running company errands. Long hours but good benefits. He'd said that sounded fine. He meant it. Low pressure was exactly what he needed. The Apex building was a 44-floor glass tower in the financial district, the kind of building that reflected other buildings in its windows so you could never quite see inside it. The executive garage was on the basement level, climate-controlled, with assigned spaces and a security desk that had never once given Nathan any trouble because he showed up when he was supposed to and did exactly what he was asked. Marcus Webb ran the security desk. He was 53, heavy in the shoulders, ex-military police, and he made the same joke every morning when Nathan badged in. "Cross, he said that Tuesday morning, not looking up from his monitor. "You're early. 3 minutes? That's early for a driver." Marcus finally looked up. "You sleep okay? Fine? You always say fine. Because it's always fine." Marcus shook his head slowly, the way he did when he thought Nathan was being difficult on purpose. "Miss Carter's got a full day. First pickup's at 8:30. She's taking the Meridian group up to the 42nd for a pre-meeting before the main event." Nathan wrote it down in the small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. "What's the main event?" "Contract signing. The big one." Marcus lowered his voice even though the garage was empty. "Military AI contract. Word is it's the largest deal this company has ever done. 7 figures doesn't cover it." Nathan nodded and wrote nothing else. The specifics of Apex's business were not his concern. He drove people from one place to another. He waited. He drove them back. You need anything else? Marcus said. No, thanks, Marcus. You're a fascinating guy, Cross, Marcus called after him. You know that? Absolutely fascinating. Nathan was already walking toward the elevator. He picked up Evelyn Carter at 8:24 in front of her building on the Upper East Side of the city. She came through the revolving doors already moving fast, a leather portfolio under one arm and a phone pressed to her ear, and she didn't look at Nathan when he opened the rear door. That was normal. She rarely looked at him. She was 30 years old and had been CEO of Apex Defense Technologies for 8 months, which made her the subject of a fairly steady stream of press coverage that ranged from admiring to skeptical, depending on which outlet you read. Nathan had driven her enough times to know that she worked constantly, slept maybe 5 hours a night, drank her coffee black and too hot, and had a habit of tapping her thumb against her knee when she was stressed in a way she probably didn't notice she was doing. She was sharp, and she was driven, and she was, in Nathan's estimation, genuinely smart. Not just boardroom smart, but fast smart. The kind of intelligence that recalibrated quickly when something unexpected happened. He'd driven worse people. He'd driven much worse. The 42nd, she said as she settled into the seat, still on her phone. Not a question. Yes, ma'am. She flicked her eyes toward the rearview mirror for exactly half a second, which was her version of acknowledgement, then looked back at her phone. I know that, Richard. I reviewed the terms last night. What I'm telling you is that Hargrove's team flagged the liability clause, and I want our legal people to have a response ready before we sit down, not after. Yes, after doesn't help me. A pause. Correct. Have it to me in the next 40 minutes. She ended the call, stared at the phone for a moment, then set it face down on the seat beside her in a gesture that looked almost like frustration. She pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. Nathan drove. He didn't say anything. She hadn't asked him to. They were 6 blocks from the tower when she spoke without looking up. You have a daughter, Sophie. He glanced at the mirror. Yes. How old? 6. She nodded slowly, turning the phone over in her hands. My assistant told me. You put her emergency contact on your HR file. A pause. Sorry, that probably sounds like I researched you. Did you? She looked up at that, a little surprised. Basic background, standard for executive transport. She studied him for a moment. You don't seem bothered. I'm not. Most people get uncomfortable when they think someone knows things about them. Nathan pulled into the executive lane in front of the tower. I don't have anything to hide. She looked at him for one more second. Not long, just enough to register that she wasn't sure she believed him, or wasn't sure she fully understood him, which wasn't the same thing. Then the moment passed, and she was gathering her portfolio and her phone and checking the time. We have 8 guests arriving for the pre-meeting, she said. I'll need you upstairs. I may need to move people between floors quickly once this starts. I'll be there. She stepped out. Nathan watched her cross the lobby through the glass, head up, pace deliberate, like she was walking toward something she'd already decided she was going to win. And he thought, without particular sentiment, that she reminded him a little of people he'd worked with a long time ago. Not the content of the work, just the way of carrying yourself when the stakes were real. He parked the car and went upstairs. The 42nd floor had been reconfigured for the day. The main conference room along the south wall could seat 30. A smaller antechamber off the main corridor had been set up as a staging area. Catering cart, extra chairs, a whiteboard with nothing on it. Nathan stationed himself near the elevator bank, which was where he usually stood when Evelyn had events like this. Close enough to be useful, far enough to be invisible. The Meridian group arrived at 9 sharp. 5 people, 3 men, and 2 women, dressed in the specific way expensive lawyers and finance people dressed when they wanted to look serious without looking like they were trying to look serious. They shook hands with Evelyn in the corridor, exchanged pleasantries at a volume calibrated for the room, and moved into the conference area. 2 more guests arrived separately, late, unannounced, badged in at the executive reception desk without triggering Marcus's attention because their credentials had been pre-cleared. Nathan noticed them because he was standing in a position where noticing things was easy and because something about the way they moved didn't match their suits. He filed the observation away without acting on it. It meant nothing yet. So, the meeting started at 9:15. Nathan could hear the tone of it through the conference room doors. Measured, professional, the kind of negotiation that was mostly about demonstrating comfort with large numbers. He stood in the corridor, checked his phone once, put it back in his pocket. At 9:41, Evelyn came out of the conference room and walked toward him. "Coffee," she said. "4 dark roasts, and a water for me." "The cart has—" "Not from the cart. There's a place on the ground floor, the Italian one near the south lobby." He understood. She wanted him out of the building for 20 minutes, which meant something in the meeting was delicate, and having the driver standing in the hallway made someone uncomfortable. It happened. "Back by 10:15, he said. "Please." He took the elevator down, bought the coffees, bought the water, stood in line behind a woman with a stroller and a man in a construction vest, and thought about Sophie's face at breakfast, the way she'd eaten her eggs with enormous seriousness. Like eating eggs was a task that deserved concentration. He was back at 9:58, coffees in a cardboard carrier, elevator doors opening on 42. The corridor was wrong. He knew it before he could articulate it. The quality of the silence, the overhead light at the far end of the hall, a fluorescent panel that had been functioning perfectly when he left, was out. The security camera above the elevator bank had been rotated slightly. Its angle changed to cover nothing useful. Nathan set the coffee carrier on the floor beside the elevator door. He didn't drop it. He set it down with care. He moved along the near wall, low and quiet, and reached the corner before he heard the voice. "Sit down, both of you, on the floor." "Boo, male?" Flat accent, Eastern European structure, but American overlay. The kind of speech pattern that came from spending years in different operational contexts. Nathan had heard it before, in places he did not think about anymore. He stopped moving. He listened. 2 voices responding. One female, cracked with fear. One male trying to sound calm and failing. Neither was Evelyn. He counted the voice he'd heard, the command voice, and noted its distance from the conference room door, maybe 8 feet inside. He thought about the layout. 2 exits from the conference room, the main door and a side access through the antechamber. Windows, 42 floors, non-operable. He thought about the 2 guests who'd moved wrong. He pressed himself flat against the wall, breathing slow and even, and looked at his own hands. He had not used his hands for the things he was thinking about in 4 years. He thought about Sophie eating her eggs with complete seriousness. He thought about the sound of the voice saying, "Sit down." He moved toward the antechamber door. He came through it without sound, using the service angle, and what he saw gave him a full picture in approximately 3 seconds. Conference room, 5 hostage takers visible, positioned, coordinated, not amateurs. 3 more likely covering exits given the scope of it. 12 civilians, 4 Meridian Group, 6 Apex staff. Evelyn Carter on her feet in the center of the room, portfolio still in her hand, jaw set, not crying. The 2 who'd moved wrong were at the head of the table now. One had a rifle. One had a laptop open, connected to something, working fast. The man with the rifle scanned the room. Nathan pressed back into the shadow of the antechamber doorway. Then Evelyn moved. She stepped backward. Not out of fear, he thought, but because the rifle had swung her way, and the heel of her shoe caught the leg of a chair and she stumbled and reached for the nearest solid thing, which was Nathan's sleeve. Her hand closed around his forearm. She felt him there, solid and warm, and looked up. He met her eyes and put one finger to his lips. She stared at him. Her chest was moving fast, her breathing shallow, the way people breathed when they were running on adrenaline and trying not to show it. He shook his head slightly. Not a reassurance. An instruction. Her eyes moved over him. Face, hands, posture, and something shifted in her expression. Not calm exactly. Something different. The particular look of a person who has just realized that what they thought they knew about a situation was incomplete. She loosened her grip on his sleeve but didn't let go. He let her hold on. Around them, 11 other people sat on the floor of a conference room that smelled of fresh coffee and dry erase markers, while armed men moved among them with the specific efficiency of people who had done this before and intended to be finished before anyone outside knew it had started. Nathan Cross stood in the antechamber doorway, still as a coat on a hook. Counting, Evelyn Carter had been in difficult rooms before. She had sat across from defense contractors who lied to her face about delivery timelines. She had fired a CFO who had been with the company longer than she had been alive. She had stood in front of a congressional subcommittee at 28 years old and answered 3 hours of hostile questions without notes. She knew how to stay composed when the room was trying to break her, but her hand was shaking. She could feel it, the tremor in her fingers where they gripped Nathan's sleeve, and she could not make it stop. Nathan didn't look at her hand. He looked past her into the conference room, and his eyes moved in a way that reminded her of something she couldn't immediately name. Slow and systematic, like a man reading a page he'd already memorized but was checking again for errors. He wasn't scared. That was the thing that struck her and kept striking her, because it didn't make any logical sense. There were armed men 15 feet away. The man nearest the door had a rifle with a suppressor threaded onto the barrel, which meant whoever these people were, they had not walked through airport-grade security to get here, which meant someone had brought them through. And Nathan Cross, her driver, the man who'd worked for Apex 14 months without anyone knowing much about him beyond his punctuality and his preference for black coffee, was standing in a doorway with his back to the wall and his breathing completely steady. "How many?" she whispered. The words were barely air. He held up 5 fingers, paused, then 2 more. 7. She let that number sit in her chest like something heavy. He tilted his head slightly toward the main conference room. She understood. He was asking her to tell him something. She thought about what she'd seen before she backed into the antechamber. She held up 2 fingers and pointed toward the laptop. Then she pointed toward the corridor behind them and held up 1 finger, uncertain. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. His eyes moved to the door that led back into the main corridor. He studied it, the gap at the bottom, the way the light fell through it. And then he made a decision she could see him making, the way a person's posture shifts very slightly when they've committed to something. He touched her arm, pointed at the floor, sat down. She sat down on the antechamber floor, back against the wall, portfolio still clutched against her chest like it was going to do something useful. The floor was cold through her skirt. She thought, absurdly, about the liability clause Richard was supposed to have ready for her in 40 minutes. Nathan was already gone. The door to the service corridor was the kind of door that maintenance people used and executives forgot existed. Nathan had noticed it on his 3rd day in the building, the way he noticed most things, not deliberately exactly, but because a certain part of his mind never fully stopped cataloging spaces. Width of corridors, location of stairwells, weight of doors. It was not something he'd trained himself to do. It was something that had become automatic and then became permanent, even after everything else changed. He moved through the service corridor without lights, one hand trailing the wall, counting his steps from the door. The corridor connected the antechamber to the main hall through a 90-degree turn that came out near the elevator bank. If any of the 7 were covering that angle, he'd know within the next 8 seconds. He reached the turn, stopped, listened. The building had its own sound, the low constant pressure of the HVAC system, the faint electrical hum of the overhead lights, the distant vibration of the elevator mechanisms. He'd learned those sounds over 14 months without realizing he was learning them. Now he filtered through them the way you tune a radio, moving past the static until the signal came clear. One person, standing, weight shifting, slight scrape of a shoe sole on tile, maybe 12 feet past the corridor exit, breathing rate moderate, not moving. Nathan closed his eyes for 3 seconds. In the dark behind his eyelids, he mapped what he knew: the elevator bank, the main corridor, the conference room, the antechamber, the service door. He placed the 7 bodies into the picture and noted the gaps. There were 2 Apex Wine Tea staff members who had been in the break room on 42 when he'd left for coffee. He had not seen them in the conference room, which meant they were either somewhere else on the floor or they were already... He stopped that thought. He turned back the way he came. He found the IT staff in the break room with the door locked from the outside. A zip tie through the handle looped around the adjacent cabinet knob. 2 people, a young man with a badge that said Dev Team and a woman in her late 20s with headphones around her neck. They heard the zip tie snap, and both flinched hard away from the door. Nathan held up one hand, palm out, and kept his voice at almost nothing. "I work for Ms. Carter, driver. I need you both to be very quiet and stay exactly where you are." The young man stared at him. "There are guys with guns." "I know." "They came in through the main entrance. They had these badges." "I know. Stop talking for a second." The woman grabbed the young man's arm. She was steadier. "What do we do?" she said to Nathan. He looked at the break room. One window, non-operable, 42 floors up. No other exits. "You stay here," he said. "Push that refrigerator in front of the door when I leave. Don't open it for anyone unless they say my name." "Nathan, say it back." "Nathan," the woman said. "Don't open it for anything else, not for voices you recognize. Nothing." "What are you going to do?" the young man asked. Nathan looked at him. He didn't answer because the answer was not something he had worked out in detail yet, and because giving frightened people incomplete plans made them more frightened, not less. "Push the refrigerator," he said again, and left. He went back to the antechamber through the service corridor. Evelyn was where he'd left her, on the floor, portfolio in her lap, jaw tight. Her color had gone slightly gray, the way people's color went when the adrenaline started to settle into something longer lasting and uglier. She looked up when he came through the door. "The IT people. They're okay. Locked in the break room." "How did you—" She stopped herself, started differently. "Who are you?" He crouched down to her level so he wasn't talking over her. "Nathan Cross. I'm your driver." "That's not what I'm asking." He held her gaze. "I know what you're asking. Not right now." She opened her mouth and closed it. He watched her decide to let it go, which he suspected was not something she did easily. "The man at the laptop," he said, keeping his voice below a breath. "What was he accessing? Did you see the screen?" She thought about it. He could see her reconstructing the room in her mind, pulling details out of a moment that had been chaotic and frightening and sorting them with more discipline than most people could manage. He noted that. "It was the Meridian Secure Server portal," she said. "The contract files. And—" She stopped. "Our classified research directory. The ARS system." "What is that?" "Military AI targeting platform. Still in development, but it's—" She paused. "It's significant. If someone got the full architecture, the source code, how long to copy it?" "Depends on what they're using. 40 minutes. Maybe less with the right credentials." Nathan checked the time in his head. They'd been inside for roughly 18 minutes before the takeover. The laptop had already been open. "We have maybe 20 minutes before they have what they came for." "And then they kill everyone," she said. Not a question. "That's the plan, yes." She absorbed that. Her thumb started tapping against her knee. The same gesture he'd noticed in the car. The tell she didn't know she had. Then it stopped. She pressed her palm flat against her leg, and something in her face went very still. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" Again, not a question. He didn't have a weapon. That was the practical problem, and he sat with it for exactly as long as it took him to think through what was available. He'd done work in worse conditions than this. He'd cleared buildings with a compromised team and no external support and equipment that failed at the wrong moment. He knew how to construct a situation out of what a space gave him, what 42 gave him. A service corridor with 2 exits, a break room with a refrigerator, a catering cart with metal serving trays and a full coffee urn still running on its heating element, a fire suppression panel behind the reception desk outside the conference room that was tied to the building's central alarm system, and approximately 600 square feet of empty open-plan office space on the far side of the floor that the hostage-takers had not yet bothered to sweep. "The fire panel," he said. "If I trigger the alarm without pulling the full suppression, it sends an alert to the building management system but doesn't flood the floor. Would anyone with Apex security access know how to cut the alarm signal before it reaches the off-site monitoring company?" Evelyn thought. "Warren Lyle, operations director. He manages the building systems remotely. Is he in the building?" He was supposed to be in the pre-meeting. Nathan thought about the conference room. He had counted 12 civilians and placed them roughly. "Describe him." 50, gray at the temples. Usually wears— She looked at him. Why does it matter what he looks like? Because I didn't see him in the conference room. A silence. He would have been at the head of the table, she said slowly. He never misses the pre-meeting. He's the one who... She stopped. Something moved across her face. Not fear. Worse. The specific look of a person reconstructing a series of events and arriving at a conclusion they do not want to arrive at. He cleared those last 2 badges, she said. It wasn't a question either. Were they in his authority to clear? Yes. Her voice had gone flat. He manages executive access. He's been with the company 11 years. Nathan said nothing for a moment. He watched her process it, the way that kind of betrayal sat differently from a stranger's threat, heavier, with a specific kind of rot to it. He knew that feeling. He'd known it before, in contexts very different from this, and it never got easier to metabolize. He's not one of the 7, Nathan said. He's running something else, probably communications. He could cut any alarm I trigger. Not if I move fast enough. The signal has to travel from the panel to the building system before he can intercept it. And if I can do it from the service corridor side, it might read differently in the system. A malfunction flag instead of a manual trigger. The off-site monitoring company would still see it. Would they call it in? To the fire department, which means the building gets emergency responders within 12 minutes, she said. The station on Callaway. I know this building's emergency response records. I reviewed them when I took over. He looked at her. Of course you did. Something briefly crossed her face that was almost, in different circumstances, a smile. Then it was gone. 12 minutes is a long time, she said. Yes, he agreed. It is. What? The man covering the elevator bank was named Dobrescu, though Nathan didn't know that yet and wouldn't have cared if he had. What Nathan knew was his height, his weight, his weapon, a compact submachine gun, suppressor-fitted, held at a 45-degree carry angle, which meant he was alert but not at high readiness, and the fact that he shifted his weight every 90 seconds with a slight preference for his left leg, suggesting an old knee problem or a structural imbalance. Small things. They became important. Nathan came out of the service corridor at the moment Dobrescu shifted his weight to the right leg, the leg that responded slower, and he came fast and quiet from the man's left side, and did what he did in a way that made almost no sound and took less than 4 seconds, and left Dobrescu sitting against the wall with his eyes closed and his hands zip-tied with the plastic strip Nathan had taken off the break room door handle. He took the submachine gun, checked the action, confirmed the load, clicked the safety. His hands did all of it automatically, without him having to think about the mechanics, and that was the part he'd spent 4 years trying to avoid acknowledging, that the knowledge didn't leave. You could walk away from the work and raise a child and drive executives to meetings and eat breakfast in a quiet kitchen while your daughter ate eggs with total concentration, and the knowledge stayed in your hands, your feet, your eyes, the way you measured distance and calculated bodies, and processed a space under stress. It stayed. He didn't have time to feel anything in particular about that. He moved toward the fire panel. Buzz it. Warren Lyle was in the IT server room on 41, 2 floors below, sitting at a terminal with a headset on and his jacket off, working with the kind of focused calm that came from having prepared for something for a very long time. He was not holding a weapon. He didn't need to. The people upstairs were handling the physical aspects of the operation, and his role was cleaner: manage the building systems, maintain communication blackout for the floors above 38, intercept any alert signals from the Apex security network, and ensure the team upstairs had the full 28 minutes they'd calculated they needed to copy the ARES files and clean the room. He'd spent 11 years at Apex. He'd watched 3 CEOs come and go. He'd watched the company grow from a mid-sized contractor to one of the largest defense technology firms in the country, watched the stock value quadruple, watched the ARES project develop from a whiteboard concept into something that foreign governments and private military organizations were paying extraordinary sums to acquire. He'd watched his own salary and title stay the same. It wasn't resentment, exactly. He preferred to think of it as a correction. His terminal showed the building management dashboard, all 44 floors laid out in a schematic he knew as well as his own apartment. He was monitoring 3 things simultaneously: the fire suppression system, the external communications relay, and the executive elevator access log. All quiet. The fire panel alert hit his screen at 10:09 and 43 seconds. He moved to cut it. Standard action, the same thing he'd done twice already in their planning phase when they'd tested the system. The signal was already gone. He stared at his screen. The signal had transmitted and been received, and the monitoring company had acknowledged it in the time it took him to reach for his keyboard, and none of that was supposed to be possible. He pressed the comm button on his headset. "We have a problem on 42. Static. Then, "What kind of problem?" "The kind that means someone up there isn't accounted for." A pause. "There were no outstanding personnel on that floor." "Apparently," Warren said, "there was." Nathan was already back in the service corridor when the alarm went quiet. Killed at the source, the way he'd known it would be. But the signal had moved. He'd counted on the 11-second transmission window, and the window had held. 12 minutes. He moved back toward the antechamber. What happened in the next 12 minutes would determine whether the people in that conference room went home or didn't, and he was not going to think past that because thinking past it was how you made mistakes in the present. He stopped at the antechamber door. Through the gap, he could hear Evelyn's voice. She was talking, not loudly, measured, controlled. And another voice was responding. Male, one of the hostage takers, inside the antechamber now. "You're wasting your time in here," Evelyn said. "I'm the one with the authorization credentials. If you want the ARES directory, you need me." "We have the credentials." "You have Lyle's credentials. Lyle has access to the outer directory. The core architecture has a secondary key tied to the CEO's biometric. You've had people working that laptop for 25 minutes, and they haven't gotten past the encryption wall yet. Have they?" Silence. "Have they?" she said again. Nathan stayed where he was, listening. "You want me to cooperate," she said. "Then tell your people at that laptop that I'll give them what they need if everyone in that room stays unharmed. That's the deal." "You don't make deals." "I'm the only one in this building who can give you what you actually came for. So yes," she said, and her voice was level in a way that cost her something. Nathan could hear the cost of it, the thin line she was walking. "I make deals." Nathan slowly let out a breath. She was buying time. She'd understood the 12 minutes without him having to say it, and she was buying them. He moved to the second position he'd identified, the open-plan office space on the far side of the floor where 2 of the 7 were stationed. He went there first because those 2 were the furthest from the conference room and the most isolated, and because what happened in the next 10 minutes needed to happen quietly enough that the remaining 5 didn't know it was happening until it was too late for it to matter. He moved through the empty office space in the low gray morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city laid out 42 floors below, traffic moving, a delivery truck making a right turn, everything outside the glass proceeding in complete indifference. And he thought about nothing except the distance between himself and the first man, and the angle, and the exact number of seconds it would take. He had not been this person in 4 years. He was this person now, When the Federal Emergency Dispatcher at the off-site monitoring company received the building alarm signal from Apex Defense Technologies at 10:09, she followed protocol. Attempted contact with the building management line, received no answer, cross-referenced with the fire department automatic notification system, and flagged it for emergency response per the company's registered emergency plan. She also noted, because she was thorough and had been doing her job for 9 years, that the signal had come in with an unusual metadata tag, a malfunction flag rather than a manual trigger, which was the kind of thing that happened when someone was trying to make the signal look like equipment error from inside the building. She made a second call. Not to the fire department, to the field office of the Federal Investigations Unit that handled infrastructure and corporate security threats, whose number was on the building's emergency contact list because Apex Defense Technologies was a classified contractor and classified contractors were required to have it there. The duty agent who picked up listened to her for 45 seconds and then said, "Stay on the line," and picked up a different phone. Outside the Apex Tower at street level, everything looked ordinary. People walked past on the sidewalk. A bicycle messenger locked his bike to a parking meter. A woman ate a sandwich on the steps of the building across the street. Nothing about the building's exterior suggested that on the 42nd floor, a man with a background that didn't fully appear in any civilian database was working his way through a coordinated mercenary team with careful and methodical precision, and that a 30-year-old CEO was sitting on an antechamber floor negotiating for the lives of 11 other people using only the intelligence she'd assembled from a 30-second glance at a conference room and the fact that she had read every security report this building had ever filed. Nothing about it showed at all. That was the thing about buildings like this. They reflected other buildings in their windows, and you could never quite see inside. Nathan had neutralized 4 of the 7 when the operations coordinator, the man whose voice he'd first heard through the conference room door, the one who gave the orders, made his first real mistake. He called for a status check. The check was designed to run every 8 minutes, a rolling confirmation that each position was secure. The check was conducted over encrypted short-range radio, which was why Nathan had not been able to use the communication systems in the building. They were being jammed on standard frequencies. But the internal check meant that when 4 positions returned no response, the coordinator would know precisely how much of his team had been compromised and would adjust. Nathan was 15 feet from the conference room door when the radio crackled and the coordinator's voice came through with a different quality than before. Still flat, still controlled, but with something underneath it. "Everyone on your feet. We're changing the timeline." Nathan heard movement inside. Chairs, people being pulled up from the floor. He heard Evelyn's voice, sharp. "We had a deal. Deals are canceled." Nathan came through the conference room door. What happened in the next 90 seconds was not clean. It never was, regardless of what the movie suggested. There was noise, and there was broken furniture, and there were people screaming and dropping to the floor, and a man coming at Nathan from the left side who was faster than he looked, and caught Nathan across the ribs with an elbow before Nathan got him down. The rib wasn't broken. He'd know it if it was. But it would bruise deep and make the next few hours unpleasant. 3 down in the room. The coordinator, a lean man in his 50s with a face that Nathan didn't recognize but a way of moving that he did, the precise economy of someone trained in a specific and serious way, was across the room with a hostage, a man from the Meridian Group, arm across the man's chest. "Stop," the coordinator said. Nathan stopped. They looked at each other across 12 feet of conference room floor. The coordinator's eyes moved over Nathan in the same systematic way Nathan's had moved over him. Assessment, classification, something else. "Cross," the coordinator said. Not a question. Nathan said nothing. "They told me you left the service. I read the file." A pause. "Driving people around." "It's a living," Nathan said. "You look different." "So do you." The coordinator's grip on the hostage didn't loosen. "You know I'll walk out of this building." "I know that's what you think." "There are still men on this floor." "There aren't," Nathan said. A silence. The coordinator was running his own calculations now. Nathan could see it, the same slight recalibration behind the eyes. "You did all of this?" the coordinator said. "Alone." "I had help," Nathan said, and glanced toward Evelyn. She was standing against the far wall with the remaining hostages. She had moved them there, he realized. While the chaos was happening, she had kept her head and moved them out of the line of fire without being asked. The coordinator followed his glance. He looked at Evelyn for a moment and then looked back at Nathan, and something in his expression changed in a way that was too slight to read clearly. "Let him go," Nathan said. "You're already done here." "The data left the laptop when the alarm went out. The download didn't complete." Another silence. Longer. From somewhere below them, far below, filtering up through 42 floors of steel and glass, came the sound of sirens. The coordinator heard them. Nathan watched him hear them, watched him process the arithmetic of the situation with the speed of someone who had spent a long career doing exactly that kind of arithmetic, and watched him arrive at the same answer Nathan had arrived at 60 seconds before the man even knew there was a calculation to make. The hostage felt the arm across his chest loosen and stumbled forward, and the coordinator lowered his weapon and set it on the conference room table with a deliberateness that was almost formal. "You're going to want to tell them I cooperated," he said. "I'm going to tell them the truth," Nathan said, "which is that you didn't have a choice." The coordinator looked at him for one more moment. "Who recruited you out?" Nathan didn't answer. "They wasted a good operator," the coordinator said. "Whoever made that call." "They didn't," Nathan said. I made it myself. The sirens got louder. Somewhere in the building, far below, doors were opening. The coordinator turned and faced the wall without being told and put his hands behind his head, and the conference room, for the first time in 53 minutes, went completely quiet. Evelyn Carter stood against the far wall with her portfolio still in her hand, watching Nathan Cross lower a weapon she hadn't known he was carrying, and she thought about everything she hadn't known about the quiet man who drove her to meetings and bought her coffee and stood in corridors and waited. She thought about the morning, the rearview mirror, the half-second she'd looked at him and not seen anything she recognized. She thought about what it meant to look at someone every day and not know what you were looking at. Her hand had stopped shaking. She hadn't noticed exactly when. The federal agents came up in 4 elevators simultaneously, which was the protocol, and the first team through the conference room door found 11 civilians seated on the floor in a rough semicircle, a 30-year-old CEO standing against the far wall with a leather portfolio pressed against her chest, and a man in a driver's uniform holding a suppressed submachine gun with the safety engaged and the barrel pointed at the floor. The first agent through the door, young, maybe 26, still running on the adrenaline of the breach, had his weapon up and aimed at Nathan before he finished clearing the frame. Down. Down now. Weapon on the floor. Nathan set the weapon on the conference table, slowly, both hands visible. He'd done this before too, in different contexts, and he knew that the most dangerous moment was the one right after the shooting stopped, when everyone's nervous system was still running at combat speed and the brain hadn't caught up yet. "I'm the one who called it in," Evelyn said from across the room. Her voice was steady. "This man is with me. Ma'am, I need you to—" "He is with me," she said again, and there was something in the way she said it the second time, not louder, just more final, that made the agent pause in the specific way people paused when they recognized they were talking to someone who was not going to be redirected. A second agent came through, older, senior ranking, the kind of face that had processed a lot of complicated rooms. He looked at Nathan, looked at the men on the floor, looked at the weapon on the table, and ran his own calculation fast. "Sir," he said to Nathan, "you're going to need to come with us." "I know," Nathan said. He went with them. He did not look back at Evelyn, but he heard her voice as he moved through the door, not directed at him, directed at the senior agent, already moving into a different mode, the mode of a person who was going to manage the next phase of this situation the way she managed everything, directly, without wasted words. The corridor smelled of the coffee he'd left in the cardboard carrier on the floor beside the elevator. It was still there. He looked at it as they walked him past. 4 dark roasts and a water, cold now, completely useless. A $40 detail from a morning that felt like it belonged to a different year. Set. They held him in a conference room on 41 for 2 hours and 19 minutes. 3 agents, rotating. A woman who introduced herself only as Special Agent Rourke and asked most of the questions. A man who took notes on a tablet and said almost nothing. And a third who stood by the door and watched Nathan with the particular alertness of someone who had been told, before entering the room, that the person they were watching had already neutralized 6 armed professionals in under an hour. Rourke was good at her job. She asked questions in a non-linear order, circling back, testing consistency. And she watched his face the way a good interrogator watched faces. Not for the obvious tells, but for the micro-adjustments, the place where memory and fabrication diverged in the eyes. Nathan answered everything she asked. He had nothing to conceal from the federal government. His record, when they pulled it, would answer most of her questions better than he could. "Special operations," she said at one point, reading from a tablet. "Multiple deployments. Classified operations. Obviously, we can't go into—" She looked up. "And then you resigned. 14 months ago." "Yes." "And took a driving job." "Yes." She studied him. "Why?" He looked at the table. "I have a daughter." Rourke wrote something. "Sophie, 6 years old. She starts 2nd grade in the fall." A pause. "And your wife?" "She died 2 years ago," Nathan said. "Pancreatic cancer. 14 months. Rourke stopped writing. "I'm sorry." "Thank you. That's a short timeline." "I know what it looks like," Nathan said. "It's not complicated. My wife died and I had a 6-year-old and I needed work that kept me in one city and had decent benefits and didn't require a security clearance that would put her at risk if someone wanted to pressure me. And you chose corporate driving. I chose stability. Driving happened to be the job. Rourke looked at him for a long time. Then she set the tablet down and folded her hands on the table and dropped, very slightly, the professional register she'd been using. Not unprofessional, just human. "Mr. Cross," she said, "you neutralized 6 armed operatives, triggered a monitored alarm signal through a compromised building management system, secured 2 civilian personnel, maintained a protected position for a third, and prevented a classified data breach worth, conservatively, several $100 million in national security exposure." She paused. "While working as a driver." Nathan said nothing. "I'm not asking you to justify it," she said. "I'm trying to understand who I'm talking to." "You're talking to Sophie Cross's father," he said. "Everything else is paperwork." Rourke looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her tablet and went back to her notes, and he thought he saw something shift in her expression. Not softness, exactly, but recognition, the kind that passed between people who understood what it cost to carry certain things and had made a decision about what to do with them. Tim. Warren Lyle was arrested in the server room on 41 at 10:34 that morning. He did not resist. He sat at his terminal with his headset on and his hands in his lap and waited for them to come, which they did, 4 agents plus building security, and he looked at none of them when they walked him out. He'd had a bag packed, not in the server room, in his car in the executive garage, a go bag he'd assembled over 3 months with the meticulous care he applied to all logistical problems. Cash, 2 passports, a phone with a number he'd memorized and would only call once. He'd planned to be in the garage by 10:15 when the operation concluded and before the external response had time to mobilize. He was not in the garage at 10:15. He was sitting in a federal vehicle being driven to a processing facility, and the bag in his car would be found within the hour, and the number he'd memorized would be disconnected by afternoon, and 11 years of careful positioning would dismantle with a speed that was almost elegant in its thoroughness. He thought about this during the drive and felt more than anything a cold and specific anger at the variable he had not accounted for. The driver. He'd seen Nathan's employment file. He'd cleared Nathan's background check personally, 14 months ago, because clearing background checks for executive transport was part of his responsibility. The file had been thorough and unremarkable. A veteran's placement hire, clean record, nothing flagged. What the file didn't contain were the classified operational records, which had been redacted at the source, which meant Warren had processed a background check on a man whose relevant history was invisible to him. He turned this over during the drive and felt the anger settle into something he recognized as a professional's respect for a factor he'd underestimated. He was too experienced and too honest with himself to call it anything else. The variable was the driver. By the time Nathan was released from the 41st floor conference room, the building had been fully secured. The wounded, 2 Apex staff members who'd been struck during the initial takeover, had been transported to a hospital 6 blocks away, and the conference room on 42 had been designated a federal crime scene. The Meridian group had been separated, interviewed, and released with instructions to remain available. It was 1:17 in the afternoon. Nathan rode the elevator to the basement garage, retrieved his company car, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time without starting the engine. His ribs hurt. The bruise from the elbow in the conference room had developed fully, a deep ache that worsened when he breathed at depth. He'd had worse. He would have worse again, probably, though he was hoping not for a while. He thought about Sophie. She got out of school at 3:15. He had time. He started the car. His phone rang before he reached the exit ramp. Building number. He answered. "Mr. Cross." Evelyn's voice, still measured but thinner now, the composure starting to cost her in a way that it hadn't or hadn't shown, while there was still a reason to maintain it. "I was told you'd left." "I have to pick up my daughter at 3:15. A short silence. "Of course, Yes." Another pause. "I wanted to say something to you. Ms. Carter. Please." Not sharp, just direct. "I need to say it, and then you can go." He stopped the car on the ramp. "All right." You saved 11 people today, she said, including me. I know that you know that, and I know you probably don't want to hear it framed that way, but I don't have another way to frame it that's honest, so that's what I'm saying. Her voice stayed steady until the last two words and then didn't, quite. Thank you. That's all. Nathan sat on the exit ramp in his company car and thought about what to say, and what he said was, "You bought the time, on the floor in the antechamber, and in the room when the coordinator changed his plan. You bought it, and you moved those people, and you did that by yourself. I didn't know what I was doing. You knew enough." Another silence, longer. "Will you—" She stopped. "Never mind." "What?" "I was going to ask if you'd come back. To the job, but that's—" He could hear her deciding something. "That's a conversation for when you haven't just spent 4 hours doing whatever you spent 4 hours doing." "Probably," he agreed. "Go get your daughter, Mr. Cross." He drove up the ramp and into the gray October afternoon, and the city was exactly as indifferent as it always was, and that was fine with him. Except that it wasn't over. He was 6 blocks from Sophie's school, stopped at a red light on Mercer Street, when the black SUV pulled alongside him and stayed there, which was the kind of thing that was meaningless in normal traffic and meaningful when you'd spent a morning the way Nathan had spent his morning. He noted the plate. He noted the tint on the windows and the antenna configuration on the roof that was slightly wrong for a civilian vehicle. He noted that the SUV had been 2 cars behind him since the executive garage and had run 2 yellow lights to maintain that position. The light changed. The SUV let him go 3 car lengths ahead and then followed. Not federal. The federal vehicles were identifiable in different ways, and Rourke had told him he was free to go, and she had not struck him as the type to say one thing and do another. Not federal. He made 3 consecutive unnecessary turns, left, right, left, maintaining speed, watching. The SUV made all 3. He picked up Sophie at 3:15. She came out of the school's front door in the middle of a crowd of other 6-year-olds, Butter the rabbit sticking out of the top of her backpack, and she looked for his car with the particular scanning focus that reminded him of no one so much as himself, which was something he thought about sometimes and didn't know what to do with. She found the car. She waved. She ran toward it with the complete physical commitment that small children brought to running, arms wide, backpack bouncing. He got out and crouched down, and she hit him hard enough that he had to brace to keep from falling backward, and the impact against his bruised ribs sent a sharp line of pain up his left side that he controlled his face around. "You're here early," she said into his shoulder. 3 minutes. That's early for you." He held on a little longer than usual. She didn't comment on it. She was 6. She took what she could get, and she smelled like crayons and the grape juice they served at lunch, and something indefinably childlike that he couldn't name and didn't try to. He strapped her into the back seat and drove home. The SUV was gone. He didn't believe it had given up. Awesome. The man who had coordinated the operation on 42 was named Casimir Vrel, though that name appeared in almost no official records anywhere. He was 54 years old. He had worked in 6 countries under 4 different organizational umbrellas, and had retired twice and come back twice and knew, in the professional way that experienced people knew things, that the business he was in had a limited number of exits and that he was closer to the end of his career than the middle. He was processed through federal holding and placed in a secure interview room and asked questions he answered selectively because the leverage calculations in his situation were complex, and he had been in worse situations and had learned that time and patience changed leverage in ways that impatience destroyed. But he thought about Nathan Cross. He told Nathan that they'd wasted a good operator. He meant it. He had read the redacted file, and even redacted it told you things. What was removed was as informative as what remained, and the profile it suggested was one of those rare operational profiles that came along occasionally and made the people who worked in certain fields take notice. What he hadn't told Nathan, because the moment hadn't permitted it, was that he recognized him for a different reason. There was a mission. 4 years ago, give or take, in a location that neither of them would name in a federal interview room. A complicated mission, the kind where the objectives on paper bore limited resemblance to the realities on the ground, and where the people who'd authorized it had made certain calculations about acceptable outcomes that the people executing it had not been consulted on. Nathan had been on that mission. So had people Casimir had known. He sat in his interview room and turned this over and noted, with the detachment of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by the way things connected, that the man who'd ended his operation today was the same man who had survived an operation that most people with knowledge of it believed should not have produced survivors. Casimir requested a glass of water. The agent brought it. He drank half. There were people who had an interest in Nathan Cross not existing. They had believed he did not exist in any practical sense, that he had gone to ground in a civilian job and was finished as an operational factor. Today's events would suggest otherwise, and those events would be reported in certain ways to certain parties, and some of those parties would update their information accordingly. He thought about Nathan's daughter, sitting in the back seat of a company car with a stuffed rabbit sticking out of her backpack. He set the water glass down and asked to speak to the duty agent. Nathan put Sophie to bed at 8:30. He made her dinner, pasta, the kind with the shells she liked, and he watched her eat it with her elbows on the table, which he was supposed to correct and didn't, and he listened to her talk about a girl in her class named Priya who had brought a frog to school in her lunchbox, and the teacher had made her put it outside and Priya had cried, and Sophie had sat with Priya at recess, which she reported with the matter-of-fact satisfaction of someone who considered this the obvious response to the situation. "That was kind," Nathan said. "She was sad," Sophie said, as though this explained it completely, which it did. He washed the dishes while she brushed her teeth. He checked the front door lock twice and the window latches in her room and told himself he was being procedural, not paranoid, and knew the distinction was blurring in a way he didn't like. He sat on the edge of her bed while she arranged butter against the pillow. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "Did something happen today?" He looked at her. 6 years old, and she read him the way her mother used to read him, in the specific way of people who paid quiet attention to things other people missed. "Work stuff," he said. "Nothing you need to think about." She looked at him for a moment with the serious brown eyes that were entirely her mother's. Then she pulled butter against her chest and closed her eyes. "Okay," she said. He stayed until her breathing changed. He went to the kitchen, poured 2 fingers of bourbon he'd had in the cabinet since New Year's, and didn't drink it. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around the glass, and thought about the black SUV, and thought about Casimir Vrel, and thought about the laptop that hadn't finished its download, and the question of where the remaining ARES data was. Now that the operation had been disrupted and the people who'd commissioned it were going to want to know whether it had been recovered or whether they needed to try again. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered it. "Cross," a voice he didn't recognize. Female, professional, moving fast. "My name isn't important right now. I'm calling because Casimir Vrel passed a message through his attorney 2 hours ago. He said to tell you the device is still in the building." Nathan sat up straight. "What device?" "He called it insurance. His team placed it before the takeover. He says he didn't know about it until this afternoon, which may or may not be true, but the message was specific. 44th floor, mechanical room, north side. He said the timeline is active." "What timeline?" He didn't say. "But the building has a federal crime scene team on 42, and evacuation hasn't been ordered because no one knew to order it." A pause. He also said, "You'll know what kind of device it is when you see it, and you'll know whether the federal techs have the right training to handle it." Nathan was already standing. "Why is he telling me this?" Nathan said. A pause. He said, "Because you said you told the truth, and because the building has civilians in it." Nathan ended the call and looked at the hallway. Sophie's nightlight turned the corridor amber. He stood there for exactly 6 seconds. Then he called Mrs. Petrakis next door, who was 71 and retired and had watched Sophie twice before without being asked too many questions. And while he waited for her to answer, he was already pulling on his jacket and looking for his keys and running the math on how long it would take him to get back to the Apex Tower at 10:40 on a Tuesday night. "Margaret," he said when she picked up, "I'm sorry to call this late. I need a favor." "Boss, Sam." He drove fast, but not recklessly. He'd been reckless once, a long time ago, and had learned the specific way it cost you. He called Rourke from the car. She picked up on the second ring, which told him she was still working, which didn't surprise him. "Cross?" Her voice sharpened immediately. "What?" "Your team on 42 needs to evacuate the building," he said. There's a device on 44, mechanical room, north side. Vrel's team placed it before the takeover. I'm told the timeline is active, but I don't have specifics. A pause of approximately 1 second. Source? Vrel. Through an intermediary. He says it was insurance and says I'll recognize the device type. Why would he? He said because there are civilians in the building. A pause. Get your people out, Rourke. Do it now, and ask me the rest later. He heard her already moving, already talking to someone else in the background, the contained, controlled sound of someone shifting into a different gear. Cross, do not go into that building. If I recognize the device, I can tell you what you're dealing with. That is not... Get the building clear, he said. I'll be there in 4 minutes. He ended the call. He knew she would be furious. He knew she was right to be furious. He also knew that the specific class of device that Vrel's operation would have used as insurance, the kind of device that required the right materials brought in through compromised security over a timeline that matched the building access Lyle would have provided, was not the kind of device that general federal crime scene technicians were trained to handle, and that the relevant EOD unit with the right protocols was 40 minutes outside the city. He parked 2 blocks from the tower and went in through the service entrance on the south side, which he knew from 14 months of entry and exit, and which was not, at 10:51 on a Tuesday evening, covered by the federal perimeter because the federal perimeter was focused on the 42nd floor and the exits they knew about. The building's lobby was lit but empty. He went to the stairwell and started climbing. 44 floors. His ribs objected on the 3rd floor and continued objecting on every floor after that. He breathed through it and kept moving. The stairwell was concrete and echoing and lit by emergency strips along the baseboard, and his footsteps were the only sound in it until the 14th floor, where he heard voices above him, agents coming down, the evacuation starting, and he pressed against the wall and let them pass and counted 8 people and a civilian he didn't recognize, and then continued upward. On 42, he heard the main evacuation underway. On 43, the floor was dark and empty. He pushed through the door to 44. The mechanical room was on the north side, behind a door marked HVAC, authorized personnel only, which had a standard keypad lock that had been bypassed with a small device pressed against the panel, which told him they'd had someone with technical knowledge place this ahead of time, and that the bypass device was the kind used in specific professional contexts. He went in. The room was large and loud, 4 main HVAC units running full, the air thick with the smell of industrial coolant and electrical systems. It was warm, and the noise pressed against him from all sides. He moved along the north wall, checking behind each unit in sequence, and found it behind the 3rd unit from the door. It was a compact assembly, smaller than he'd have guessed, which was consistent with what it was. He crouched in front of it and looked at it without touching it, and his mouth went dry in a very specific way. It had gone dry before in similar circumstances. Vrel had been right. Nathan knew what it was. He knew because he had encountered 2 of them in his career, in places that didn't appear on maps, and had spent a combined 40 minutes in their proximity under conditions he preferred not to revisit. He pulled out his phone and called Rourke. "Tell me you're not in the building," she said. 44 mechanical room, north side. I'm looking at it. He described it. 3 sentences, precise. A silence on her end. Then, how long do you need? Give me the EOD protocol for this specific configuration. Walk me through it. Cross, I can't authorize. How long for your EOD unit? 38 minutes. Rourke. He looked at the device. The timer was a simple digital display. He looked at the number on it. I have 22 minutes. Walk me through it. Another silence. Longer. He could hear her breathing, and he could hear the specific sound of a person who was good at their job deciding between 2 things that both had costs. All right, she said. Listen carefully. He listened. The timer read 4 minutes and 11 seconds when he finished. His hands were steady, which was the thing he trusted about them. They had always been steady, even when the rest of him was not. And the device was no longer a device in the way it had been 42 minutes ago, which was the relevant fact. He sat back on his heels in the loud, warm mechanical room on the 44th floor and pressed both hands flat against his thighs and breathed. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He'd worked faster. He'd worked slower. He'd worked in worse conditions than this, and in conditions that made this room feel like a controlled environment. That was true, and it didn't help anything, and his hands were shaking now, which they always did after, because the steadiness was a function of focus, and focus had an end, and this was the end of it. He sat on the floor with his back against the HVAC unit and let his hands shake for a while. He thought about Sophie, asleep in her room with the amber nightlight and butter pressed against her chest. He thought about the morning, the coffee tray on the floor by the elevator, Evelyn's hand on his sleeve. He thought about Casimir Vrel in a federal interview room, passing a message through an attorney because there were civilians in the building. He didn't know what to do with that. He filed it, where he filed things he didn't know what to do with, which was a place he'd been adding to for years. His phone buzzed. Rourke. "Building's clear," she said. "Are you—" "It's done," he said. A pause. "Cross, I'll be downstairs in 10 minutes. Have someone meet me at the South Service entrance. And Rourke—" He paused. "Don't put my name in the report. I can't—" "You can," he said. "Figure it out." He stood up. His ribs ached. His hands had stopped shaking. He looked at the device one more time, inert now, components separated in the specific way that made them permanently harmless. And then he turned and walked toward the door and the stairwell beyond it, 44 floors down to the street, to his car, to the drive back to his apartment, where an old woman was sitting in his kitchen reading a paperback, and his daughter was asleep in the amber dark, breathing steadily through the wall. The building hummed around him, all its systems running, everything still standing. He went home. He slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough. It wasn't, and his body knew it wasn't, the way a body accumulated its debts and presented them at inconvenient times, but because Sophie woke at 6:15 and came into his room and stood by the side of his bed with butter under one arm and said, "Dad," steadily through the wall. The building hummed around him, all its systems running, everything still standing. He went home. He slept 4 hours. Not because 4 hours was enough. It wasn't, and his body knew it wasn't, the way a body accumulated its debts and presented them at inconvenient times, but because Sophie woke at 6:15 and came into his room and stood by the side of his bed with butter under one arm and said, "Dad," in the particular tone that meant she was hungry and also that she had been awake for a while deciding whether to wake him. He opened his eyes. The ceiling was familiar. The amber from the hallway nightlight had faded with the morning. "Eggs?" he said. "Pancakes," she said. He got up. He made pancakes. His ribs reminded him of the previous day every time he reached across the stove, a deep, specific ache he'd been cataloging since Tuesday morning, and that would take 2 weeks to fully resolve. He'd taped them the night before with athletic wrap from the first aid kit under the bathroom sink, which helped with the mechanical problem but not the discomfort. Sophie ate 3 pancakes and part of a 4th, and left the rest in a way that suggested she'd lost interest in eating and gained interest in something else entirely, which turned out to be a question she'd been building towards since she sat down. "Mrs. Petrakis said you had to go back to work late," she said. "I did." "At nighttime?" "Yes." She considered this. "Is that normal?" "It's not normal," he said. "It was a special situation." She turned her fork over in her hand, examining it. "Are you okay?" He looked at his daughter. Her hair was still pressed flat on one side from sleeping. She had maple syrup on her chin and didn't know it. She was 6 years old, and she was asking if he was okay with the careful phrasing of a child who had learned from watching that certain questions needed to be asked in the right way. "I'm okay," he said. She looked at him in the way she sometimes looked at him, the long evaluative look that was entirely her mother's, and then nodded once and went back to her pancakes. He drove her to school. He kissed the top of her head at the door. He watched her go in. He sat in the car and stared at the school's front entrance for longer than was necessary, and then drove toward the Apex Tower, because there were things that needed to be finished, and he had learned a long time ago that not finishing things had a cost that compounded. The 42nd floor was still a federal crime scene. The 44th had been cleared by the EOD unit that arrived at midnight, who had confirmed his work and filed their report in language that per Rourke's subsequent phone call at 7 a.m., did not include his name. He didn't know exactly how she'd managed that, and he chose not to ask. He badged in through the executive garage. Marcus Webb was at the security desk and looked up when Nathan came through, and the expression on Marcus's face was the specific expression of a man who had spent the previous evening being interviewed by federal agents and had arrived at certain conclusions that he was not yet sure how to address. "Cross," Marcus said. "Morning, Marcus." A pause. Marcus looked at him for a long time. He was a former military police officer, and he read people the way his training had taught him to, and whatever he was reading in Nathan's face appeared to be confirming something he'd already suspected. "You look like you slept about 4 hours," Marcus said. "About that." Another pause. "I've been at this desk for 6 years," Marcus said. 6 years of watching people come in and out of this building. Drivers, executives, contractors, maintenance people. I watch how they walk, how they hold themselves, where their eyes go. He set down his pen. "I knew you were different. I just didn't know how different." Nathan looked at him. "Does it change anything?" Marcus thought about it. "No," he said, "but I would have liked to know. It wasn't relevant to the job. Until it was." "Until it was," Nathan agreed. Marcus picked his pen back up. "Ms. Carter's on 38. They moved her operations down while 42 is secured. She's been here since 7. "I know. She called me this morning." "You going up?" "That's why I'm here." Marcus nodded slowly. Then, with the casualness of a man raising a subject he decided to raise and then not raise and then decided to raise again. "The 2 people they took out on stretchers yesterday. One of them, the woman from Apex staff, the one with the headphones around her neck. She's all right," Nathan said. "Rourke told me. Concussion. They're keeping her for observation." Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding for a while. "Good," he said. "Good." He waved Nathan through. "Go on up." Evelyn Carter had commandeered a conference room on 38 and turned it into something that looked, by 8 in the morning, like a war room that had been running for 16 hours, which, in functional terms, it had. 3 laptops open, 2 phones, a legal pad covered in her handwriting, a whiteboard with names and arrows and bracketed sections that Nathan looked at briefly and understood was her map of what had happened and what needed to happen next. She was on a call when he came in. She saw him, held up one finger, and finished the call in 45 seconds with the specific efficiency of someone who had learned to end calls at exactly the right moment. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning." "Sit down, please." He sat across the conference table from her. In the daylight of the 38th floor, with the crisis a day behind her, she looked different from the woman who'd sat on the antechamber floor with her portfolio in her lap. She looked tired in a way that was real and unmanaged, which was different from the performance of composure she'd maintained the previous morning. She looked like someone who had been running on coffee and controlled crisis response for 24 hours, and had arrived at the moment where the adrenaline had finished and the full weight of the previous day was making itself known. There was a half-eaten sandwich near her legal pad that looked like it had been bought several hours ago and forgotten. "How are you?" Nathan said. She looked slightly surprised by the question, as though she'd been asked every other kind of question since yesterday afternoon, and that particular one hadn't come up. "Functional," she said. "Mostly." She picked up her pen and set it down. "The Meridian contract is still viable. Their lead counsel called this morning. They were shaken, but they want to proceed. The ARES data, we've confirmed the download was incomplete. Lyle had access to the outer directory, but the secondary biometric lock held, which means the core architecture wasn't compromised." "That's good." "It's better than good. It's the difference between a crisis that cost us a security breach and a crisis that cost us a very bad morning and a federal investigation." She paused. "And the device on 44. He said nothing. "Rourke told me," she said. "Not in detail, but enough." She looked at him directly. "You went back last night." "There were civilians in the building. The federal team was there." "The EOD unit was 40 minutes out." She held his gaze. "You went back," she said again. And it wasn't an argument, just a statement she appeared to be sitting with, turning over. It's done, he said. Building's intact. Your people are safe. She nodded slowly, then she picked up her pen again and wrote something on the legal pad. And when she spoke next, her voice had a different quality. Still direct, but with something more careful in it. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to know you can say no. Okay? I'm rebuilding the security architecture for this company from the ground up. The board has given me full authorization. It turns out that a coordinated mercenary takeover and an attempted classified data theft focuses the board's attention in useful ways. A brief dry note in her voice that wasn't quite humor, but was adjacent to it. I need someone who understands physical security, threat assessment, operational vulnerabilities. Someone who can look at how this attack was built and tell me every weakness they exploited and every weakness we didn't know we had. She paused. I don't want to hire a security firm. I want someone who I know I can trust because I've already seen how they operate under conditions that are as honest as they get. Nathan looked at the whiteboard, the names and arrows, the bracketed sections that were damage assessment and response mapping, which she had built herself alone at 7 in the morning, because that was how she approached things. That's not a driver's job, he said. No, she said. It isn't. He thought about Marcus at the security desk. He thought about the 2 IT staff in the break room, the zip tie on the door handle, the particular quality of their fear. He thought about 11 people on the floor of a conference room and the distance between what the building should have caught and what it didn't. Let me think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. He nodded. Then he said, Rourke is going to want to talk to you again today. She called this morning, 2 o'clock. When she asks about the fire alarm signal, the malfunction flag, she's going to be specific about it. She knows it wasn't equipment. Evelyn looked at him. What do you want me to say? The truth. That a building system sent a malfunction signal. That you don't know the details of how. He paused. The specifics of who did it don't need to be in her report. A silence. She studied him. You did that while I was on the floor in the antechamber. Yes. And then you came back and there was a man in the antechamber and You were managing it, he said. You were doing fine. I was terrified, she said flatly. Most people who are terrified don't also negotiate effectively, he said. You did both. She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the feeling she was doing the same thing she'd done in the car Tuesday morning, cataloging, assessing, revising what she thought she knew. Then she looked back at her legal pad. 2 o'clock with Rourke, she said. I'll handle it. He stood. She looked up. Nathan, she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name without the attached context of a crisis, and it had a slightly different sound for it. The offer stands. Take whatever time you need. He went downstairs. The federal investigation moved with the speed that investigations of this classification moved, which was faster than civilian proceedings and more opaque. Rourke ran her team with the specific efficiency of someone who knew that the window for certain kinds of information stayed open for a limited time and that bureaucratic delay had operational consequences. Warren Lyle was processed, charged, and transferred to federal custody within 36 hours of his arrest. He retained counsel, a firm that specialized in exactly this kind of case, which told the investigators something about how long he'd been planning for the possibility of this outcome, and entered a phase of negotiated disclosure that would take months to fully resolve, but that began producing information within the first week. The espionage network behind the operation was larger than the initial scope had suggested. 3 other companies in the defense contracting sector. 2 overseas entities that existed in a legal gray area that several governments were going to find very inconvenient to acknowledge. Casimir Vrel was a more complicated calculation. He had, through his attorney, provided information that prevented what the EOD report described as a catastrophic structural event. He had done this voluntarily and without conditions, which was either genuine or strategic, and the distinction mattered for certain purposes and didn't for others. His cooperation in the ongoing investigation was a variable that the prosecution was treating carefully because people like Vrel knew things that governments found useful, and the usefulness of those things had to be weighed against the calculation of accountability, which was the kind of equation that produced outcomes that were rarely fully satisfying to anyone. Rourke told Nathan this on the phone Friday afternoon, 3 days after the event. She was not required to tell him anything. He understood her telling him as a form of the respect that passed between people who recognized each other's competence and decided to treat each other accordingly. The message he passed, Nathan said, about the device. Do you know why he did it? He says because there were civilians. Do you believe him? A pause. I believe it's part of the reason, she said. I also think Vrel has been in this business long enough to make calculated investments. You're a known quantity now. You weren't before. Nathan thought about that. He's not getting out. No, but people like Vrel operate on longer timelines than you and I usually think about. Another pause. Cross. The mission 4 years ago, the one he alluded to. You know what he was referencing. Yes. Is there anything in that mission that creates ongoing exposure for you or for your daughter? He was quiet for a moment. He was standing at the kitchen counter, the same place he stood in the mornings sometimes, and Sophie was in the next room doing homework with her tongue between her teeth. Possibly, he said. I've been managing it. That's not specific enough. No, he agreed. It isn't. Another silence. I'm going to need you to be more specific, Rourke said. Not today, but soon. I know. And Cross, the SUV that followed you Wednesday afternoon. His hand tightened slightly on the phone. You know about that. We've been running broad surveillance on anyone connected to the event. We picked up the tail on traffic cameras. We ran the plates. A pause. The vehicle is registered to a logistics company that doesn't appear to have any logistics. The company has addresses in 4 cities and no employees on record. That's a particular kind of shell structure, Nathan said. Yes, Rourke said. It is. He didn't say anything else because there was nothing useful he could add without saying more than he was prepared to say on a phone call on a Friday afternoon in his kitchen with Sophie doing homework in the next room. Be careful, Rourke said, not as an instruction, as something between professional courtesy and something else. I'm always careful, he said. I know, she said. Call me when you're ready to be more specific. She ended the call. He set his phone on the counter and looked at the cabinet above the stove that didn't close all the way, and he thought about the logistics company with no employees in the 4 cities, and he ran what he knew and what he suspected and where those 2 things converged, and arrived at a conclusion that didn't surprise him but settled into his chest with the particular weight of things he had been aware were coming and had been hoping would come later rather than sooner. Later, it appeared, was now. But he called a man named Garrett Doyle on Saturday morning from a payphone at a gas station 3 miles from his apartment because Garrett Doyle was the kind of contact who communicated through channels that made other channels feel careless. And the number Nathan had for him was a number that only worked from certain kinds of phones, and only when you called within a specific window of time that changed on a monthly rotation that Nathan had memorized and had been hoping he would never need. Doyle picked up on the 3rd ring. I heard you had a busy week, Doyle said. You saw the coverage? I saw enough of it. The parts that made the news were interesting. I imagine the parts that didn't were more interesting. Garrett, Nathan said. Aldous Crane. A silence, long enough that Nathan counted it. You think Crane's people put the tail on you, Doyle said. Not a question. The shell company structure, the vehicle configuration, the timing, 3 days after an event that put my name, or something close to my name, into federal reports that certain people with access to certain channels could have read. Cross. Doyle's voice shifted slightly. Crane has been... I know what Crane has been, Nathan said. Is he still operating? Another pause. As of 6 weeks ago, yes. The organization went quiet after the Meridian business. Doyle stopped. The Meridian business. The contract. Your company's contract. Yes, Nathan said. Cross. If Crane's organization had an investment in the ARES data, then the operation at Apex wasn't just corporate espionage, Nathan said. It was a piece of a larger acquisition. And when it failed, the people who paid for it want to know why, Doyle said. and the answer to why leads back to you. He let that sit for a moment. How's your daughter? She's fine. That's why I'm calling. You need to move. I'm not moving Sophie out of her school over something that hasn't materialized. Cross, I need to know what I'm dealing with before I decide what to do about it. That's why I'm calling. I need Crane's current operational footprint. Whatever you can get me without flagging the inquiry. A very long pause. Nathan could hear Doyle breathing, and he could hear, beneath that, the ambient sound of wherever Doyle was, which was somewhere with wind and open space, which was consistent with everything Nathan knew about how Doyle operated. You understand, Doyle said, that if Crane knows you're asking, the situation accelerates. I understand. You're not in the service anymore, Cross. You don't have backup on this. I have Rourke, Nathan said. Federal level, she's invested. One agent. And whatever Vrel has that he's trading, Nathan said, which I think is more than what's on the table so far. Doyle was quiet again. Then, give me 48 hours. Don't use this number again until you hear from me. Garrett, Nathan paused. Thank you. Don't thank me, Doyle said. Clean your apartment, change your routes. And Cross, don't let the girl out of arm's reach until you hear from me. The call ended. Nathan stood at the gas station payphone and watched a minivan pull up to the pump across the lot, and a man get out and put a credit card in the reader, and the utterly ordinary machinery of the world continue to operate around him. He drove to Sophie's school to pick her up from an after-school art program, because it was Saturday, which was when the school ran the program, and because she'd been working on something she described only as a project with the private satisfaction of a child who was not going to tell you what it was until it was finished. She came out carrying a piece of construction paper turned face down against her chest. Can I see? He said. Not yet. When? When it's done, she said, in the definitive tone of someone who had considered and rejected alternative timelines. He put her in the car. He checked the street in both directions before he pulled out, the same way he checked it every time now, and told himself that it was manageable and that he would know more in 48 hours, and that managing the interval between now and knowing was a skill he had and had used before. On Monday morning, 9 days after the takeover, Nathan drove to the Apex Tower and went up to 38 and accepted Evelyn Carter's job offer. He did this for several reasons, and in order of priority, he was honest with himself about. The practical reason was that the salary was substantially better than his driver's pay, and that a better salary was a resource. And resources mattered when you were a single father operating in an environment where certain threats were beginning to require resource management. The secondary reason was that the job itself was real and needed to be done. And he was, as he'd understood, sitting in that conference room on 41 answering Rourke's questions, not someone who could look at the structural vulnerabilities of a building he'd operated in and walk away without addressing them. The reason he didn't say out loud, even to himself with complete clarity, was that Evelyn Carter had sat on an antechamber floor and bought 12 minutes without being asked to, and had moved 11 people out of a line of fire without hesitation, and ran her war room alone at 7 in the morning, and had not in the 10 days since the event done what many people in her position would have done, which was use his actions for institutional credit or media positioning or leverage of any kind. She had kept what she said she would keep. She had handled Rourke the way he'd asked her to handle Rourke. He noticed things. He always had. That was one of the things he noticed. She was on the phone when he came in, and she held up one finger the same way she had the previous Wednesday, which was already a rhythm. That specific gesture, that specific weight, and finished the call and looked at him and said, Well? Yes, he said. She nodded once. No celebration. She picked up her pen and made a note on her legal pad, which he suspected was a running list of decisions and confirmations. I need a week before I can start formally, he said. I have some personal matters to resolve. She looked up at that. She was sharp enough to hear what was in the words and what wasn't. Is there something I should know about? Not yet, he said. Possibly soon. She held his gaze for a moment. Are you safe? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. For now, he said. She nodded. Take what you need. The position doesn't disappear. He started to stand. She said, "Nathan." He looked at her. "If it becomes something I should know about," she said, "tell me." He thought about the logistics company with no employees in the 4 cities and Garrett Doyle's voice saying, "Don't let the girl out of arm's reach." He thought about the way Evelyn had said, "Tell me," not as a request for information she was owed, but as an offer of something, the specific offer of a person who was not going to look the other way if there was something to see. "I will," he said. He wasn't sure it was entirely true, but he meant the intention of it, which was the closest he could get. Garrett Doyle called 47 hours later, 1 hour ahead of the window, which meant the information was either time-sensitive or worse than he'd been willing to say on Saturday. "Crane's organization has a contracts division," Doyle said. "Third-party acquisition work. Governments, private military, non-state clients. They had a significant investment in the ARES project, not direct, through 2 intermediary layers, and the failure of the Apex operation cost them a relationship they'd been building for 3 years and a financial commitment that puts the number in the low 8 figures. That's a significant loss," Nathan said. "It's a loss they're going to want to recover," Doyle said. "And Cross, the word from Crane's organization as of 48 hours ago, is that there's an open contract. The subject isn't named in any document, but the description is specific enough that anyone who knew the Apex situation would know who it refers to." Nathan sat very still. He was in his car, parked 2 blocks from Sophie's school, the engine running. "The contract is for information, not action," Doyle continued. "For now. Current location, daily pattern, vulnerabilities. The escalation to action would come from a separate authorization." How long before authorization would be sought? If the information acquisition runs normally, 2 weeks? Maybe 3. "The SUV on Wednesday was information gathering," Nathan said. "Yes. They know where you live. They probably know the school." He looked at the school's front entrance, a yellow crosswalk sign, a tree that was starting to turn, its leaves going amber at the edges. "Garrett," he said, "is Crane in the city?" A pause. "His organization maintains a presence. Whether he's personally, is he in the city?" A longer pause. "Intelligence as of 72 hours ago puts him in the metro area." Cross, "I need the address." "Absolutely not." "Garrett." Cross. Doyle's voice changed in a specific way, the way it changed when he was finished being collegial and was speaking from a different place entirely. "I am not giving you Crane's location so that you can do whatever you're thinking about doing. I told you what I know because you needed to know it. What you do with it is something that you need to think about very carefully for reasons that include but are not limited to a 6-year-old girl who has already lost one parent." Nathan said nothing. "Call Rourke," Doyle said. "Give her what I gave you, the shell company, the contract, the investment in ARES. Let federal machinery do what federal machinery does." "That takes time," Nathan said. "Yes," Doyle said. "It does. Which is why I am also telling you that a conversation I had this morning suggests that Vrel, in the course of his cooperative disclosure, has provided information about Crane's organization that the federal team was apparently not expecting and is moving on with some urgency." A pause. "Vrel may have accelerated the federal timeline considerably." Nathan sat with that. "Why would Vrel provide information about Crane?" "Because," Doyle said, "Crane's organization was Vrel's client, and Vrel, whatever else he is, appears to have made a determination about how he wants the end of his career to look, which is a human thing, Cross. People make those determinations." Nathan thought about a man sitting against a wall with his hands behind his head, placing his weapon on a conference table with a deliberateness that was almost formal. He thought about the message passed through an attorney. The device is still in the building. He thought about what it cost to make a determination like that. He thought he probably understood it better than most people would. "Call Rourke," Doyle said again. "Today. Don't wait." "I'll call her," Nathan said. "And Cross, for what it's worth," a pause. "You did good work, both of you, the driver and the CEO." He paused. "Don't let this be where it ends." He ended the call. Nathan sat in his car for 3 minutes, watching the school's front entrance. A teacher came out and taped a paper decoration to the glass door. Something orange and seasonal, a leaf or maybe a pumpkin. He couldn't tell from this distance. The ordinary machinery of things. He picked up his phone and called Rourke. She answered in 2 rings. "Cross?" "I have something," he said. Aldous Crane. His organization had a financial investment in the ARES acquisition, and there's an open information gathering contract connected to the Apex operation. "I have a source. I'll give you what you need to run it down, and I think it connects to disclosures Vrel has already started making." He paused. "I also have a tail that's been active since Wednesday, and I need it resolved before it escalates." A silence. He could hear her sit forward. "How solid is your source?" she said. "Solid." "How long have you known about Crane?" "Long enough," he said. 4 years, specifically. Another silence. "The mission?" "Yes." "Okay," she said. "We need to sit down. Today." "Where are you?" "I'm picking up my daughter from school in 15 minutes. After that—" "Bring her," Rourke said. "We have a secure family room at the field office. She can watch something and eat cookies while we talk. We have good cookies." He almost said something that wasn't quite a laugh. "She's going to hold you to the cookies." "I'll make sure we have them," Rourke said. "Cross, you did the right thing calling." "I know," he said. "I should have called 3 days ago." "Yes," she said. "But you called today. That's what matters now." The school doors opened and a small crowd of children came out, and in the middle of them, Sophie walked with her construction paper project held face down against her chest, scanning the parking lot for his car with the same systematic look he used scanning rooms. And he raised his hand out the window, and she saw it, and her face changed in the complete unguarded way that children's faces changed, everything in it visible at once. He got out of the car and she ran toward him, and he caught her and held on, and the construction paper was pressed between them, and he made himself not look at the street, made himself be present for exactly this moment and nothing else. "Can I see it now?" he said into her hair. She pulled back and considered. Then she turned the paper over. It was a drawing in crayon. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing outside a building that was drawn with the specific architectural ambition of a 6-year-old who had decided buildings were rectangles with many windows. Below the figures, in the careful large letters of someone still making friends with the alphabet, it said, "Me and Dad." He looked at it for a long moment. "Do you like it?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "I do." "The building is your work," she said. "I made it tall." "You did," he said. "That's exactly right." He put her in the car and drove toward the federal field office, and behind them the afternoon moved on in its ordinary way, and the drawing sat on the passenger seat where he'd put it carefully, face up, the 2 crayon figures standing in front of their tall rectangle. And he drove. Rourke did have good cookies. Sophie ate 4 of them at a small table in the corner of the secure family room while a cartoon played on a tablet someone had propped against a stack of manila folders. And she did this with the same concentrated seriousness she brought to pancakes and eggs and homework and most things that deserved attention. Nathan watched her from the doorway for a moment before he went into the adjoining room to talk to Rourke, and he thought about what Doyle had said on the phone. Don't let this be where it ends. And he thought about the drawing on the passenger seat, the 2 crayon figures in front of the tall rectangle. He went in and sat down and told Rourke everything. Not the edited version he'd been carrying for 4 days. The full version. The mission 4 years ago, the location he'd never named in any civilian context, what the mission's actual objectives had been versus what the authorization paperwork described, and the names, the ones that appeared in no redacted file because they had never been in any file at all, of the people who had commissioned certain outcomes that the people executing the mission had not been told about in advance. Aldous Crane was one of those names. Rourke listened without interrupting, which was how she listened when something was important. Her pen moved steadily across her notepad. Occasionally she made a sound that meant she was tracking, and once she stopped and looked up and said, "Say that last part again." And Nathan said it again, and she wrote for a longer time before she looked up and nodded. When he finished, she set her pen down and looked at her notes for a moment. 4 years, she said. Yes. You've been carrying this for 4 years. I've been managing it, he said. There's a difference. She looked at him. Is there? He thought about it honestly. Less of one than I told myself, he said. She nodded slowly. The mission produced casualties on both sides, the sanctioned objectives and the unsanctioned ones. She paused carefully. Crane's organization lost an asset, someone significant to them, and they've known since then that you were the variable that changed the outcome. Yes. They believed you were inactive. The Apex situation put you back on their map. Yes. She picked up her pen again. Cross, the information you've given me tonight, combined with what Vrel has been providing through his disclosure process, gives us enough to move on Crane's organization in a way that's been unavailable to us for a long time. She paused. This is significant. I want you to understand what I mean when I say significant. I understand. It means the threat calculus changes. If we move fast enough and thoroughly enough, the open contract becomes worthless because the organization commissioning it ceases to function. How fast is fast enough? Faster than 2 weeks, she said. I can make that happen. He looked at her across the table. She was 41 or 42, he guessed, with the particular kind of face that showed the work without being defined by it. Someone who had spent years inside difficult problems and had come out still believing the work mattered, which was not something you could fake over a long career. Why? He said. She looked up from her notes. Why what? Why does it matter to you, beyond the professional obligation? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because you went back into a building to deal with a device that wasn't your responsibility, she said. Because the first thing you asked me to do was keep your name out of the report. Because your daughter is eating cookies in the next room and she has already lost one parent. She paused. And because people who do the right thing in the dark, when no one is watching and there is nothing to gain from it, are people I am willing to move fast for. Nathan said nothing for a moment. Get some sleep tonight, Rourke said. Both of you. I'm going to make some calls. But he put Sophie to bed at 8:30. She took the drawing and put it on the nightstand on her side, next to Butter, in the specific arrangement of a child who had decided something belonged in her most important space. He sat on the edge of her bed. Dad, she said. Yeah. Are the work things getting better? He looked at his hands, thought about what was true versus what was manageable versus what a 6-year-old needed to carry at bedtime. They're getting handled, he said. That's what's happening. She thought about this. That's not the same as better. No, he said. But it comes before better. You handle the thing first, and then better has room to happen. She turned this over with the serious consideration she gave most things. Then she pulled Butter against her chest and closed her eyes, apparently satisfied with the logic, or satisfied enough. He stayed until her breathing changed. Then he went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and didn't pour the bourbon this time. He made tea instead, which his wife used to make at night when she couldn't sleep. And he stood at the counter and drank it, and thought about the fact that he'd made tea and whether that meant something, and decided it probably didn't mean anything except that it was late, and he was tired, and bourbon had never actually helped. His phone buzzed at 11:40. Rourke. We're moving on Crane's primary location at 6 a.m., she said. I'm sending 2 agents to your building tonight. They'll be outside until this is resolved. That's... He stopped. Thank you. The Shell Company vehicle was picked up by traffic cameras again this afternoon, 2 blocks from the school. He felt the specific cold that wasn't temperature. They had someone watching pickup. Yes, which is why the agents are outside tonight and why we're moving at 6. A pause. You and Sophie stay inside until you hear from me. Don't go to the school tomorrow. She has Nathan. It was the first time Rourke had used his first name. It had the weight of something deliberate. Stay inside. All right, he said. I'll call you when it's done. He stood at the window and looked at the street below. A black sedan was already parked across from the building, engine off, 2 silhouettes in the front seats visible in the ambient light. He felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, more the feeling of a weight being distributed, shared with people who were equipped to carry part of it, which was something he'd forgotten how to allow and was learning again. He went to bed. He slept 6 hours, which was more than he'd expected. Rourke called at 8:47 the next morning. "It's done," she said. He was sitting at the kitchen table with Sophie across from him, both of them eating cereal because he hadn't had the focus for eggs, and she hadn't complained, and he stood and walked to the hallway window when the phone rang and stood there listening. "Crane was at the location," Rourke said. "We have him. We have his operations director and 4 other principals. We're executing simultaneous warrants on the shell company offices in the other 3 cities. A pause. "The open contract is dissolved. The organization isn't going to be in a position to commission anything for a very long time, if ever." He pressed his hand flat against the window frame. The glass was cold. Outside, the street was ordinary. Someone walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked, 2 pigeons on the power line across the way. "The agents outside can stand down," Rourke said. "You can take your daughter to school." He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them. "Rourke," he said. "Yeah. I owe you something." "You don't," she said. "But if you want to be useful, I'm going to need your formal statement on the mission 4 years ago. A real one, documented. It closes a file we've had open for a long time, and it protects you going forward in ways that informal information doesn't." "I know. It's not going to be comfortable." "I know that too." "Schedule it for next week," she said, "after you've had a few days." A brief pause. "Take Sophie somewhere nice this weekend, somewhere that isn't 42 floors up." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "She wants to go to the aquarium." "Go to the aquarium," Rourke said, and ended the call. He walked back to the kitchen. Sophie looked up from her cereal with the patient expression of someone who had been waiting. "Good news?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "Good news. Can I go to school?" "Yes." "Can we go to the aquarium on Saturday?" He sat back down across from her. "How long have you been planning that?" "Since last Saturday," she said. "I didn't ask because of the work things." He looked at his daughter, who had not asked for the aquarium because she had sensed, with the particular attunement of a child who had learned to read a parent's state the way you read weather, that it wasn't the right time. Who had waited? Who had eaten her cereal across from him this morning without making anything harder than it needed to be? "Saturday," he said. "Yes." She went back to her cereal with the satisfied expression of a negotiation concluded on acceptable terms, and Nathan Cross sat across from her in the small kitchen of their small apartment and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular quality of stillness that wasn't the absence of things, but the presence of enough. 3 weeks after the takeover, Apex Defense Technologies held a private internal ceremony to recognize the staff members who had shown exceptional conduct during the crisis. The Meridian contract had been signed. The ARES project had been transferred to a new secured development environment with an entirely rebuilt access architecture. Warren Lyle's replacement had been named from an external hire, vetted through a process that Nathan had designed from scratch over 12 days and that Evelyn had approved without changing a single component, which she told him only after the fact in the specific way she acknowledged things, briefly, directly, without ceremony. Nathan did not attend the internal ceremony. He was in a conference room on 38 reviewing the updated emergency protocols with the building's new security contractor when it happened 2 floors above him, and he stayed in the conference room until the review was complete. And that was the way he preferred it. Marcus Webb, however, attended. And when Nathan came back through the executive garage at the end of the day, Marcus was at the security desk with the slightly elevated posture of a man who had been somewhere that meant something to him. "They said your name," Marcus said, "at the ceremony, without details. Just that a member of the company staff had shown extraordinary conduct." He paused. People clapped for a while. Nathan signed out on the log. "How long is a while?" "Longer than you'd think," Marcus said, "for a name without a face attached." Nathan capped his pen and put it back on the desk. "That's the right amount." Marcus looked at him. "You know, most people—" "Marcus." "Right. Marcus said. You're not most people. Good night, Marcus. Good night, Cross. The formal statement about the mission took 2 sessions and a combined 7 hours. Rourke ran them herself, with 2 other agents present and a court reporter and a recording system that Nathan found slightly absurd and accepted as necessary. He answered everything. He was specific where specificity was possible and acknowledged the limits of what he knew where those limits existed, which was the discipline of a good witness and also, he thought, the discipline of a person who had decided that the space between what you remembered and what you were willing to say should be as small as possible. The second session ended on a Thursday afternoon. He drove home through the kind of November rain that came in sideways off the river, wipers working hard, the city looking gray and wet and almost beautiful the way cities sometimes looked in bad weather. He thought about the mission. He had not talked about it for 4 years. In the talking, something had happened that he hadn't expected. Not relief exactly, and not resolution, because some things didn't resolve, they just became part of the permanent furniture of who you were, and you arranged your life around them. But something, a weight that had been entirely his, distributed at last into a system larger than himself. The federal record, the documented truth, a file that was now open rather than closed. His wife would have said, "It's about time." She would have said it without judgment, which was one of the things about her he'd loved most. Honesty without the sharp edge of it. He thought about her less often now than he had a year ago, which he understood as healthy and felt as complicated. She was in Sophie's eyes. She was in the way Sophie ate deliberately and thought before she spoke and waited for the right moment to ask for the aquarium. She was in the kitchen in the morning and in the amber nightlight in the hallway and in the drawing on the nightstand, the 2 crayon figures in front of the tall building. She was not gone. She was just relocated, in the way that people who mattered went somewhere different rather than nowhere. He got home, shook off the rain, started dinner. The first time Evelyn Carter came to his apartment was unplanned. It was a Saturday in December, 5 weeks after the internal ceremony, and she was in his neighborhood because she had a meeting 2 blocks away that ended earlier than expected, and she texted him. They had been texting with increasing frequency about work things that were more and more frequently not entirely work things, and said, "I'm around the corner. Is that strange to say?" He texted back, "No, come up if you want." She came up. She was in weekend clothes, which was the first time he'd seen her outside of professional context, and she looked different. Not less, but differently arranged, the executive composure replaced by something that was simply her, which was also sharp and also direct, and also had a quality of restless intelligence that didn't switch off when she wasn't in an office. Sophie was at the kitchen table doing a puzzle, which she had been doing with absolute focus for 45 minutes, and which she did not look up from when Evelyn came in. "Sophie," Nathan said, "this is Miss Carter. She's my—" He paused on the word, aware of the small precision required. "She's my boss." Sophie looked up. She assessed Evelyn with the full evaluative gaze. "Hi," Sophie said. "Hi," Evelyn said. "That's a complicated puzzle." "It's 500 pieces," Sophie said. "The ocean." "Can I see?" Sophie slid it a half-inch toward her, which was an invitation. Evelyn sat down at the table and looked at the puzzle, and then, without being asked, without making a production of it, she found a piece along the bottom edge and placed it. Sophie looked at the placed piece. Then she looked at Evelyn. "Do you want to help?" Sophie said. "That's okay." Sophie considered. "You can do the fish part," she said, and pushed a cluster of blue-green pieces toward her. "I'm doing the coral." Evelyn pulled the fish pieces toward her and started sorting. Nathan stood in the kitchen doorway watching his boss and his daughter work a puzzle at the kitchen table in the December light, and felt something move through him that he didn't name because he didn't have a name for it yet, only the quality of it, which was something between surprise and the recognition of something he had almost stopped expecting. He made 3 cups of tea, 2 for them, 1 for himself. He brought them to the table and sat down, and the 3 of them worked the ocean puzzle for an hour in the kind of quiet that wasn't empty, but full. The specific fullness of a room where people were comfortable enough to not need to fill the silence. Sophie finished the coral. Evelyn finished most of the fish. Nathan did the border, which nobody had claimed, and which was fine with him. Tot. The contract espionage network connected to Crane's organization took 4 months to fully dismantle, which was fast by the standards of federal investigations of this complexity. Rourke attributed the speed to the quality of Vrel's cooperation, which had proved more comprehensive than even she had anticipated, and to the documentation Nathan had provided across the 2 7-hour sessions, which had closed gaps that the investigative team had been working around for years. Casimir Vrel received a reduced sentence and was transferred to a federal facility that Nathan had no information about and did not ask for. He thought about Vrel occasionally in the way you thought about people who occupied a complicated space in your understanding of human behavior, people who were not good and were not entirely explicable, and who made a decision near the end of something that was difficult to categorize as anything other than human. Warren Lyle pled guilty to 17 counts and was sentenced in the spring. Nathan did not attend the sentencing. He read the coverage on his phone during his lunch break, sitting on a bench outside the Apex Tower in the first real warm day of the year, and he thought about 11 years and the particular rot of betrayal from inside, the specific damage it did to the people who'd trusted without knowing they were trusting. And he finished reading and put his phone in his pocket and went back inside. The ARES project came to completion in the summer, and the Meridian contract closed on schedule with figures that Evelyn reported to the board in language that was measured and professional, and that Nathan, present in the room in his capacity as head of security, could see she was quietly satisfied with in the contained way she was satisfied with things. A slight stillness in her expression, a specific quality of composure that had something underneath it that was not composure at all. He was getting better at reading her. She was getting better at knowing he was reading her and not minding. The thing between them developed the way real things developed. Slowly, imperfectly, with conversations that were sometimes awkward, and moments that didn't land cleanly, and the particular friction of two people who were both used to operating independently, learning to account for another person's presence in their calculations. She had dinner at his apartment in February. He had dinner at her place in March, which Sophie discussed at length on the drive home, reviewing the evening with the thoroughness of a quality control inspector. "She has a lot of books," Sophie said. "She does. She has a fish." "I saw the fish." "She named it Kevin," Sophie said with the tone of someone reserving judgment on this choice. "Kevin is a fine name for a fish," Nathan said. Sophie was quiet for a moment. "Do you like her?" He glanced in the rearview mirror. Sophie was looking out the window with the studied casualness of a 6-year-old attempting subtlety. "Yes," he said. "Like a friend or—" "Sophie." "I'm just asking." "I know you're asking," he said. "I'm telling you that you don't need to worry about it." She seemed to consider whether this was a satisfactory answer. "I like her," she said finally, with the clean simplicity of a child's verdict. "She does puzzles right." "That's a reasonable standard," Nathan said. "It is," Sophie agreed, and went back to looking out the window. In April, on a Tuesday morning that was gray and cool in the specific way of the previous October, Nathan Cross drove to the Apex Tower and badged in through the executive garage and nodded at Marcus Webb and took the elevator to 38. It had been 6 months since the takeover. The 42nd floor had been restored and was in full operation with a security architecture that Nathan had rebuilt from the frame out, access protocols, monitoring systems, emergency response procedures, personnel screening processes that Warren Lyle's methodology had proven were inadequate, and that Nathan had replaced with something that was harder and less convenient and considerably more reliable. He knew every weakness that had been exploited and had addressed them, and he knew, with the honesty of someone who had spent a long time in environments where honesty about risk was the difference between people going home and not, that new weaknesses would emerge as the environment changed, and that the work of security was not a problem you solved but a discipline you maintained. He had come to understand, suited for that kind of work. Not just technically. In the deeper sense, the patience it required, the willingness to sit with incomplete information and uncertain outcomes, the ability to be still in a difficult room and count, and keep counting, until the picture was clear enough to act on. He'd spent 14 months trying to be invisible. It turned out that invisibility was not the same as peace, and that peace, whatever it was was not the same as inaction. He was still working that out. He thought he'd be working it out for a while. Evelyn was on a call when he came into 38, and she held up one finger and he sat down across the conference table and waited. And she finished the call in 40 seconds and looked at him. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She picked up her pen and looked at her legal pad, the same yellow legal pad that had been her constant companion since the October morning she'd turned 38 into a war room at 7 a.m. This one was new. She'd filled 2 since then, but the handwriting on it was the same dense shorthand and bracketed sections and arrows connecting things. "Board call at 10, she said. "Second quarter projections. I need you to walk me through the physical security cost summary." "I have it." "After that, the new intake review for the facilities team. 2 candidates I want your read on before I finalize." "Done." She made a note. Then she paused, pen on the pad, and looked up. "You seem different today," she said. He thought about it. "I slept well," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the assessment she applied to most things: quick, accurate, seeing more than the words. "The statement," she said, "Rourke told me it was finalized. Last week." She nodded slowly. She didn't ask him more than that because she understood the shape of it well enough to know that he would say what he wanted to say, and that asking past that was not the right move. It was one of the things he valued about her. She knew where to stop. "Good," she said simply. "Yeah," he said. She went back to her legal pad. He looked at the whiteboard on the far wall, which had a new set of names and arrows and bracketed sections. The second quarter security review. Nothing dramatic. The ordinary ongoing work of keeping a company's vulnerabilities managed. He thought about October, the coffee carrier on the floor by the elevator, the weight of a weapon in his hands that he hadn't held in 4 years, a hand closing around his sleeve in the dark. He thought about what it had cost him to walk back into the thing he'd walked away from, and whether it had been worth it, and understood that the question itself was wrong, that worth it was not the calculation you did afterward. The calculation you did afterward was, what do you do with who you turned out to be? He thought he was figuring that out. Not today, not all at once, but in the accumulating way of things that were real, meal by meal, morning by morning, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, one conversation at a time between 2 people who were both still learning how much space to give each other and how much to close. His phone buzzed. Sophie, through the school's parent messaging system. She had learned to use it this year and deployed it with frequency and judgment. The message said, "Don't forget Butter needs washing tonight. He smells." He stared at it for a moment. Then he typed back, "I know, I'll wash him." She sent back a single thumbs up, which was her most efficient form of approval. He set the phone down. Across the table, Evelyn was writing something, her thumb moving against the edge of the legal pad in the small unconscious rhythm he'd noticed in the car last October, the tell she didn't know she had. He didn't mention it. He just noted it, the way he noted things, and let it be. Outside the 38th floor windows, the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way.